Oliver Bearman stood in for the ill Carlos Sainz last time out at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix and had an incredible debut. But did you know that he was not the first driver to hop in to a Formula 1 car on very short notice? No, today we're going to be looking at the top 8 stand-in Formula 1 drivers. Coming in at number 8 is probably one of the greatest drivers Formula 1 has ever seen. And it is, of course, Michael Schumacher. Yes, did you know that Michael Schumacher was actually a last-minute call-up to Jordan in 1991? The story goes, back then, little Michael Schumacher was just a young sports car driver for Mercedes, and moving over to Formula 1, Jordan had a driver called Bertrand Gachot, which I probably pronounced that terribly. Bertrand Gachot, imprisoned. He gas-shot someone, didn't he? Round of applause. Great dad joke. And he is probably one of the strangest dropouts from Formula 1 we have ever seen. He was actually imprisoned for an altercation with a taxi driver. Now, this left Jordan very last minute without a driver for the Belgian Grand Prix. And Mercedes went over to Jordan and said, we've got this young driver here called Michael Schumacher. Now, he knows loads about this circuit, which was actually a huge lie. He'd only really had experience as a spectator. So Michael Schumacher hopped on his bicycle, did a few laps of the circuit, and then come qualifying, was able to put it 7th on the grid, which was an incredible result for the Jordan car. Now, in the race, things did not go his way. There was a clutch issue very early on into the race, and that unfortunately left Michael Schumacher with an early retirement. But the promise that he showed in just the qualifying session alone was enough to give him a full-time driver's seat with Benetton for the rest of the season. In fact, he actually replaced another driver who was on this list, who's a little bit later on. From one German driver to another, in 7th place we have Sebastian Vettel. Back in 2007, Robert Kubica had a huge crash at the Canadian Grand Prix, one of the biggest crashes that Formula 1 has seen in recent seasons. And sadly, Kubica was not cleared by doctors to be healthy enough to race at the American Grand Prix, which was only a few days later. So up steps young Sebastian Vettel, who was currently halfway through a Formula Renault 3.5 series and was actually winning the championship at the time of jumping in at this Grand Prix. Now, this wasn't Sebastian Vettel's first outing in the BMW Sauber. He'd actually done 4 practice sessions over the course of the last 2 seasons in 2006 and 2007, and in fact was actually the fastest driver to ever get a penalty for speeding in the pit lane at his debut in Turkey in 2006. Sebastian Vettel showed a lot of promise over the practice sessions and then qualified in 7th position. However, the race did not go to plan. A fairly average start and then nearly rear-ending a Renault forced him to go deep into turn 1 and lose a lot of positions. But a great recovery drive from Vettel put himself into P8 and scoring a Formula 1 point on debut. And that result set him for the rest of the season, a few races later, getting the full-time Toro Rosso seat. And then I think it's safe to say the rest was history, moving on to Red Bull and of course becoming a 4-time world champion. Next up in 6th, we have the guy who is the main reason for this list, and that is Oliver Bearman. The weekend started off very strongly for the F2 driver, actually in fact putting it on pole position for the Premier team at Saudi Arabia. But then Carlos Sainz, who was already feeling ill earlier on in the weekend, was announced to have appendicitis, and this then meant he was not allowed to take part in the Grand Prix because he had to have emergency surgery. Up steps young Oliver Bearman, only really having 1 practice session before qualifying to get used to not only a Formula 1 car, but also one of the most difficult and driver challenging circuits Formula 1 has ever put together. The fast flowing Jeddah Corniche circuit is one that is going to take prisoners if you get it wrong. But Oliver Bearman did not step a foot wrong. In qualifying, slowly built up to it, nearly out-qualifying Lewis Hamilton and getting into Q3, only just missing out by 0.03 of a second. Starting the race in 11th position then, he built himself up again throughout the race. A very solid result for him, overtaking Nico Hülkenberg and learning as he went. He overtook him very early on and then realised that Hulkenberg just opened up the DRS and said, bye-bye, and overtook him straight away. Oliver Bearman learned what he did wrong and didn't do it the next time around. He waited for the DRS zone and then made sure next time around that he got the position over Nico Hulkenberg. A different strategy for Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris allowed them to drop back behind Bearman after a late pit stop, and they were never able to catch up enough of the gap to overtake the Ferrari driver, and that secured a fantastic P7 for Bearman on debut and one of the most difficult circuits in Formula 1. And what is next for Oliver Bearman? We will just have to wait and see on that one. He could be back for the Australian Grand Prix. It has not been announced that Carlos Sainz will be back into the car, but I'm sure whatever happens, Oliver Bearman will be ready, and we're excited to see how he will do over the rest of his career. But what do you guys think at home? Where will Oliver Bearman be in 2025? Let us know in the comments. Fifth on this list, and we have Kamui Kobayashi. Back in 2009, Kamui Kobayashi had won the GP2 Asian Series, but over in the main GP2 Series, it wasn't going according to plan, and it looked like his single-seater career could be over. But a crash for Timo Glock at the Japanese Grand Prix, resulting in an injured leg, opened the door for Kamui Kobayashi to drive for Toyota for the remaining 2 rounds of the season. And Kobayashi took that opportunity with both hands, securing a fantastic result on debut with P9. Moving to the finale in Abu Dhabi, and things got even better for Kamui Kobayashi, finishing P6 in that race and ahead of his experienced teammate Jarno Trulli. These 2 races alone were enough to secure a seat for the following season as Sauber picked him up for 2010, the team who he would eventually score a podium at the 2012 Japanese Grand Prix. Kamui Kobayashi now has had a very successful endurance career with Toyota and is actually now even the team principal of the Toyota endurance team. And that perfectly brings us on to our number 4 driver, who is a current Toyota endurance driver, and that is of course Nyck de Vries. Nyck de Vries, who in all fairness did not have the greatest 2023 season, but he absolutely shined in 2022 when he joined Williams on just a moment's notice. Nyck de Vries at the time was a Formula 2 champion and a Formula E champion, and he also had a very close relationship with the Mercedes team, and was actually one of the easiest choices for all of the Mercedes-backed teams to be the free practice 1 young driver, and he was doing just that with Aston Martin in FP1. But before FP3, it was announced that Alex Albon would no longer take any participation across the rest of the weekend because, very similar to Carlos Sainz, came down with appendicitis. This opened the door for Nyck de Vries to step into that Williams seat. And it couldn't have come at a better time for Nyck de Vries. It was no secret that the Williams' only attribute was that it was fast in a straight line. And to go to Monza, which is basically just straight, is the perfect opportunity to take your Formula 1 opportunity and fully run with it. And boy, did Nyck de Vries do that. He qualified 13th. Which for Williams is a really good result. And not only that, he did also beat his teammate, which was of course Nicholas Latifi. But due to a lot of penalties given out at the Italian Grand Prix, he actually started 8th in that race and was able to bring the car home to 9th in a Williams, scoring his first point in Formula 1. And in all fairness, so far to date, his only point in Formula 1. Third in our list is one that I completely forgot about until making this list, but George Russell, stepping in for Lewis Hamilton in 2020 at the Sakir Grand Prix because Lewis Hamilton had caught COVID. Now, this could not have come at a better time for George Russell. There were so many people jumping on the George Russell bandwagon, really banging that drum and saying that he should have the drive at Mercedes over Valtteri Bottas. And for Formula 1 fans, we now had an opportunity that you rarely get. The driver that you want in a seat going up against the driver that currently has that seat. And we got to see it all unfold at the Sakir Grand Prix. Up until this point, George Russell was a Williams driver and points, sadly, had eluded him. But this could be the chance for George Russell to not only score his first points in Formula 1, but to do it with a race win. And what a car to jump into. The Mercedes in 2020 is probably one of the greatest Formula 1 cars ever made. One of the fastest through the corners, that is for sure. He only missed out by 26 thousandths of a second to Valtteri Bottas in qualifying and missing out on his first pole position. But in the race, George Russell got everything right. He was absolutely flying into a late safety car decided his fate. Both Mercedes drivers boxing under the safety car, but miscommunication on the radio allowed George Russell to be given Valtteri Bottas's tyres, which in Formula 1 is not allowed. He then had to come in on the next lap, change his tyres again, get the correct tyres fitted and put back on his way. A great recovery drive from George Russell, put himself back into second and hunting down the leader of Sergio Perez. But unfortunately, disaster struck yet again. A puncture for the young Brit meant that his race was effectively over. He still managed to recover to score some points and his first points in his career, scoring P9 and also the fastest lap. This result alone single-handedly showed everybody that George Russell is not to be messed with, and is probably one of the main reasons why he got the Mercedes seat in 2022. Now taking on the 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, and so far in this season beating him quite comfortably as well. I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot from George Russell over the rest of his career. Number 2 is a driver that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about our first driver, Michael Schumacher. So now we're going to circle back to that one. And number 2, we have got Roberto Moreno, who stood in for Benetton in 1990. Now, Roberto Moreno's career wasn't exactly going to plan at this stage. He was most likely seen driving for some of the teams at the lower end of the field, rarely finishing races, and also, in all fairness, rarely qualifying for races as well. But when Benetton's full-time driver Nannini got an arm injury in a helicopter crash, this allowed Moreno to have a seat in one of the top teams. At this stage of the season, Benetton were fighting Williams for third in the championship. And jumping in the car at Suzuka, he was able to put the car in P8, only half a second from experienced teammate Ike. And as we all know from that historic 1990 Japanese Grand Prix, Prost and Senna straight into turn 1. It's happened immediately. They crashed straight into each other, both out of the race. This then promoted both of the Benetton drivers up a few positions into 3rd and 4th. And thanks to problems for both Berger and Mansell in the race, this promoted Benetton to a 1-2 finish in Japan, giving Moreno a podium on debut with the Benetton team. And this drive was enough to secure himself a full-time seat for Benetton in the 1991 season. Sadly though, it didn't really go to plan for him in that season, and unfortunately was replaced by the promising Michael Schumacher. Our number 1 driver on this list goes to a Formula 1 world champion, and it is Mario Andretti, who stepped in for Ferrari in 1982. At this stage of his career, Mario Andretti had won the Formula 1 World Championship in 1978. He'd left Formula 1 after having a final season with Alfa Romeo in 1981, but did step in before this race for Williams in 1982 at the Long Beach Grand Prix. That race sadly did not go to plan for Mario Andretti, as it unfortunately resulted in a DNF. But when championship contender Pironi sustained a career-ending leg injury, Mario Andretti was called upon by the Ferrari team to step in at the home of the Tifosi in Monza. Now, I'd imagine any driver would be feeling a lot of pressure stepping into one of the biggest team names in Formula 1 or Ferrari, but also at the fans' home Grand Prix in Monza is got to be one of the most difficult things to step into, but not for a Formula 1 world champion. Mario Andretti said, "You guys have your pressure." Not to mention, this was the first time that Andretti had a competitive Formula 1 car since his title-winning season in '78. But there was no pressure on Mario Andretti as he stuck it on pole position in Monza in front of the home crowd. Sadly, in the race, a turbo issue stopped him from showing his full potential, but he was able to bring the car back home in 3rd position, showing one of the greatest stand-in results of any driver we have seen so far. And that is our list of top 8 Formula 1 drivers who have jumped in at the last moment and given us spectacular results. Do you agree with our list, or is there a driver that you feel is missing? Let us know in the comment section below, and make sure you subscribe to the WTF1 channel.